I went from a 142 to a 170, and if I can go from a 142 to a 170, so can you. So it's official. There are no longer any logic games on the LSAT. That means that the only sections remaining are the reading comprehension and the logical reasoning sections of the exam. Now, you might be wondering off the bat, should I even take the LSAT when the GRE is being offered? And traditionally, the GRE has been seen as an easier exam than the LSAT. So maybe you should take that instead. Plus, there are many law schools now that will accept the GRE score in lieu of the LSAT, so maybe you don't even need to take the LSAT. My 2 cents on this remains the same as the previous video I did on the LSAT, which is linked in the caption, and that is that admissions committees know what they know, and they are biased towards the things that they understand and that they're used to evaluating. And in this context, that means that even though admissions committees by now have more experience with evaluating candidates' GRE scores alongside candidates that have LSAT scores, the LSAT is the OG. The LSAT is the exam that they've been evaluating for decades and decades. And the LSAT, for all its imperfections and for the fact that it doesn't really evaluate your ability to practice law, it is still supposed to be based on the types of skills that you will need as a practicing lawyer. For all of these reasons, I recommend that you take the LSAT, especially if you're indifferent between which exam you want to take. Now, when you start this journey to 180, the first thing you need to remember is that you're not going to improve on this exam unless you practice. And every step of the way that you're studying for this exam is going to be some form of practice, whether it's spamming practice questions or doing a full-length practice exam. Because logic games is no longer on the exam, you really only need to master 2 types of questions: logical reasoning and reading comprehension. Now, I always recommend that when you're starting the studying process, you begin by getting a broad overview of the types of questions that are asked on the LSAT, in this case, logical reasoning and reading comprehension. There are many services and programs that offer this type of overview. Personally, I'm a big fan of the Power Score Bibles. These are the books that I used when I studied for the LSAT, and I think that they offer exactly what you need to build your foundation before diving into practice, and they're pretty cheap.
Perfect.
Relatively speaking. Now, whether or not you use the Power Score Bibles or a different product, the hope is that in this foundational period of learning, you're going to understand what types of questions are going to be asked. You'll perhaps do a couple of practice questions with the answers explained to you very clearly. The key is to kind of get your feet wet before you dive into intense studying. And then, after you have your foundation built, it's time to dive right into practice. And this is one of the best parts of the LSAT, and normally I don't use the words best and LSAT in the same sentence, but bear with me. The LSAT is a learnable exam, and it doesn't have the sort of dense memorization that's required for other exams like the MCAT or the bar exam. Instead, the way that you get your score up on the LSAT is by practicing and practicing and practicing.
Talk about practice.
The best way to begin this practicing is to do questions one at a time, completely untimed, and after you do every single question, you evaluate and look at the answer, and then you understand if you got the answer wrong, why did you get the answer wrong? And this is the most important part, okay? If you get the answer right, you're doing something right. You probably already understand the underlying logic and the principle and the rule. But if you did something wrong, the way that you're going to prevent yourself from getting that type of question incorrect again in the future is by learning why you didn't get it right this time. And to this end, it's important that you use resources that give you explanations for why you got a question wrong. So just keep your eye out when you're evaluating what resource you're going to use, whether it's PowerScore or 7Sage or something else. During this period of studying, focus your attention on the resources that actually provide you explanations for why the answers to the questions are what they are. I recommend you do at least 200 questions, each in reading comprehension and logical reasoning, in this one-by-one, untimed environment. Now, after you get through that, the next step that I recommend is take entire sections of the exam untimed. And similar to the exercise we just talked about, as soon as you finish doing one of these sections untimed, you want to look at the answers and review the exact questions that you got wrong, and then figure out why you got them wrong. And ideally, you approach the question again from as fresh of a perspective as you can to understand why you would answer in the correct way. I recommend doing section by section in an untimed environment for at least 15 exams worth of LSAT exams. And by the way, past LSAT exams are available for purchase. You can get them on Amazon. And my recommendation is always to take the oldest exams first, because over time, the test makers takers will change the style and the wording of these questions. So you want to make sure that as you're leading up to your exam day and you're continuing to practice, that the most recent exam material is the stuff you're going to be studying right before your exam. That's why you start with the oldest stuff first. Now, after you've gotten pretty comfortable with these types of questions, you've done a bunch of these practice sections in an untimed manner, it's time to take sections of the exam on a timed basis. And this could be pretty stressful. I remember when I started doing these sections timed, I found that I couldn't complete the sections in the time that was allotted. It took me a couple of weeks before I started getting comfortable and finishing the sections on time, and then months after that before I started confidently finishing the sections with a little bit of time to spare. But there's always exceptions, because maybe there's that one question in logical reasoning that just hangs you up for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. This is general test taking advice, but when you get stuck on a question, you need to put a hard stop on the amount of time that you're willing to give it so it doesn't eat up all of your time for answering the other questions on the exam. This is really important on the LSAT because these questions can be frustratingly hard to answer, and it's easy to get sucked in and spend 10 minutes going back and forth in your head on the logic of a question. Meanwhile, you have 12 other questions you need to answer in the exam. By the time you get to them, maybe you don't have enough time that you need to answer them. There's no right answer here, but I wouldn't spend more than 3 minutes on a single question. Just mark an answer, circle the question so you know to come back to it, and move on. Now, the last phase of your studying should be doing more and more timed sections back to back to replicate what it's going to feel like for you on exam day when you do have to do all of these sections pretty much back to back to back to back to back. I often get asked if it makes sense to take a full-length practice LSAT at least one time before the exam, and the answer, I believe, is yes. You want your brain to become acclimated to that long-term period of sustained critical thinking, because it's easy to do maybe 30 minutes of this studying, but it's much harder to do it for 2.5 hours straight. But you also don't need to overdo it either. As long as you're getting through at least one practice test's amount of questions, ideally every day for the month leading up to the exam, I don't see a reason why you need to do more than one full-length sit-down practice LSAT per week leading to exam day. The thing that's really going to build your score is practicing hundreds and hundreds of these questions, not necessarily blocking off 2.5 hours to mimic the test-taking environment and do all of that studying in one sit-down period. Now, to dominate the sections themselves, with logical reasoning, I cannot emphasize this enough. You've heard me say this before already in this video. You gotta just practice. Logical reasoning on the LSAT is all about pattern spotting. It's about spotting the pattern of the logic that the test takers are testing you on, and the way that you're gonna pattern spot that logic is by doing dozens and dozens of these questions until answering them really does become second nature. When I was studying, it took me around 25 or so exams worth of material before I really started gaining confidence in spotting these patterns in the logical reasoning sections. And after you learn it, you don't unlearn it. It's there. Just remember that the way that you get the most out of your practice is by understanding why you got a question wrong and learning how to reapproach that question again to get it right the next time. Simply doing the questions and then seeing your score is not really going to help you in the long term. Now, for reading comprehension, yes, practice is important, but what's more important than just practicing reading comprehension is honing in your skill at recalling specific information from things that you read. Now, reading comp was always my weakest section, not just on the LSAT, but even on the SAT when I was in high school. So I'm not going to pretend to be the expert in this section. But what I can tell you is that yes, practice is super important, but I would also invest time in reading news articles and then plugging the article into AI like ChatGPT, asking it to quiz you on the various details or perspectives or other facts that show up in the article. The reading comprehension section really is this mix of testing your ability to quickly consolidate information from a written piece and also extrapolate on the various perspectives or opinions that are stated in the piece, including the authors. So yes, practice questions are helpful, but so too is practicing the act of reading and recalling information quickly. How long should you study for? At minimum 3 months before your exam day, ideally closer to the 6-month mark. You don't want to start too early because there's only so many resources for the LSAT out there. There are so many practice questions for the LSAT that exist. And if you're going to put in the work to do all of those questions that exist out there, and to be clear, clear, that is what I recommend, and yes, that is a lot of work, then you need to be thoughtful about when you use these resources. But also, studying for an exam a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out, that's not really going to be helpful for you. By the time you get to the exam day, you're probably not going to remember a lot of the things that you studied years past. So I believe the sweet spot is 6 months. 1 month to build the foundation, 2 months to ramp up your questions in an untimed manner, the last 3 months to drill, baby drill, on the question sections in a timed manner, along with occasional full-length practice tests. These days, the examiners also allow you to cancel your score if you aren't happy with it. And I would say 100% use that to your advantage. If you're consistently scoring in the 170s, but something happens on exam day and you get a 165, or you're really down about it, cancel the score so that your future admissions committees at law schools will not see the 165. And yes, take the exam again. So this applies if you want to take the exam again, but it also applies if it fits your timeline and your career better. It is absolutely worth thinking about taking time off, or thinking about taking 1 year as a gap year before you apply to law school to focus on the LSAT, if you think that that time is what you need to get the best score possible. Admissions committees weigh the LSAT tremendously. Many people, including myself, believe that the admissions committees of law schools will weigh the LSAT to be worth as much as your entire college GPA. Even a score that is 3 points higher on this exam can mean the difference of getting into a university that is 30 ranks higher than where you would have gotten in if you were 3 points lower. And it's not just about the rank of the law school. If your dream isn't to go to a T14, that's totally fine, but it also matters for scholarship money. The higher your LSAT, the more money will be offered to you in the form of scholarships. So take your time with it, don't rush it, it's really important. If you're trying to stand out in the crowd and you're asking yourself, what exactly can I do when I'm in college to optimize my application for success? What classes should I take? What work experience is important? When should I apply? What should my personal statement be written about? Then check out the guide that I wrote to getting into law school. Link is in the caption. It will give you the frameworks that you need to optimize your application for success in getting into your dream law school. Keep up the good work, and I'll see you next time.